again, if Malthus is pessimistic about the relationship between population and supply of food or resources, Esther Bostrup, who was born in 1910 and she survives until 1999, came up with a more optimistic approach. And this can be seen from her book called The Conditions of Agricultural Growth in 1965. Remember, Esther Bostrup is also the key person that highlighted women's involvement or roles in development. Now, her idea is very opposite of Malthus. Yeah, so for her, yes, the environment has limit, resources has limit, but people also have other resources, which is knowledge and technology, and this knowledge and technology can be used, can be harnessed to increase food supply. As basically the increase of population is not necessarily something bad. It doesn't necessarily lead to catastrophe as mentioned by Malthus, but actually that in itself can become a place of innovation. So was Esther right? Was she right about it? He said there's evidence to support Bostrup in terms of argument. There's an increasing intensity of shifting cultivation, especially in different places of the world. So rather than just roaming around and just hunting and gathering people, there's a shift towards cultivation. Yeah, there's a move from slash and burn practices to using irrigation in rural areas with higher population densities. And the Green Revolution, which has produced widespread introduction of high-yielding varieties, pesticides. Even here in Malaysia, you can see the Jelapang padi that has in the 70s and the 80s that has increased the yield of rice here in Malaysia, in Kedah and different places. So hugely increased yields allowed more people to be fed. So basically those things support Bostrup's idea. Bostrup admits that the overpopulation can lead to unsuitable farming practices, which may degrade the world. Yeah, so and population pressure as one of the reasons for desertification in the Sahel region. So she admits those things do take place and can lead to unsuitable farming practices, but she also argues at the same time human being or people can come with the knowledge that they have, with the skills that they have, can encounter the problem. Now from Malthus to Esther, so we look at theory modernization. What does theory modernization say about the environment? So modernization theory built, as we mentioned, we have looked in our classes in the past, the modernization approach was built on the idea of mobilizing technology to use resources more efficiently through industrialization and mechanization of agriculture. We have seen that what's happened in Industrial Revolution 1, especially the first Industrial Revolution in Britain, and the agrarian revolution, and so on and so forth. So it is very technology focused, and that led to efficiency and through industrialization and mechanization. So this has impact on basic attitude towards the natural environment. If you adopt this theory of modernization, it sees the environment as input into a human device system. So we look at, for theories of modernization, they look at the environment as something, so input that you can bring into a human device system to make sure that the environment is basically something that you can exploit, something that you can harness for the human being. So little for people. So little attention was paid to the potential environmental damage or the long-term sustainability of such an approach. So as mentioned, so during the industrial revolution in England, the environmental impact of rapid urbanization and industrialization were clear. So that's why Engel, in his book, The Conditions of the Working Class in England, describes the results of overcrowding, poverty, and unregulated industrial processes. So basically here Engel is basically saying that is the impact of modernization theory that leads to modernization models of development and also policies and practices. So it leads to overcrowding, poverty, and unregulated industrial processes, and this has direct implications on the environment. And so that is the main critiques towards modernization, because it sees the resources or the environment around us for human beings to harness and basically dominate. Yeah. How about socialist approach to the environment? Basically, the socialists has the notion of control. Remember, socialist model of development is centrally planned. There's only the center is the government. It's very, very government oriented. Everything is centrally planned. Yeah. So for them, they look at the environment to be something to be tamed. Yeah. To be tamed meaning to be subdued, to be brought into to be submission. Yeah. So the taming of nature has often been a key element in development strategies of centrally planned economies. So in fact, according to Marx, development involves human ability to transform nature to increase standard of living. So basically to transform nature, to transform water into electricity supply for human being to use. So in Capital, Das Kapital, Marx's perspectives on human dominance of nature is reflected in this description. He develops the potentialities slumbering within nature and subjects the player forces to his own sovereign power. So that is basically how socialists look at the environment round about them. So in fact, yeah, so that influenced their approaches to the environment. Some of the largest individual development projects have been implemented within centrally planned economies. This is partly due to the desire to be seen to achieving greater infrastructure successes. Misalnya the former USSR, the mega projects, and the Three Gorges Dam in China. Now there is a critique towards modernization theory in socialist models of development. This is what we call limits to growth. Modernist projects with their focus to technological solutions, yeah, to perceive limitations of the natural resources was challenged by the increasing environmental movement in many parts of the world during 1960s. And so they highlight the limit of growth models, yeah, as proposed by modernization theories, misalnya Rostow, including those ones in the socialist models of development. Yeah, so in 1962, Rachel Carson wrote a book called The Silent Spring that dealt with the environmental impacts of insecticide, DDT, the way it is stored in organisms that ingested it and leading to the death of mammals and birds. So that is an important book to look into, Silent Spring, so Rachel Carson's book. So that she point to the idea that there is limits to, yes, technology is important, it helps to bring balance to between population and food supply, but yet at the same time technology and all these things that we have produced have environmental impacts. So there is limits to growth model, and that led to people to go back again looking at Martha's idea. Yeah, so going back to the beginning again, looking at Martha's idea. This has led to the emergence of what we call neo-Malthusians perspective on the balance between the environment and development. Meaning of neo is, of course, you all know that is new, and This came out of accelerated population growth in newly developed countries and less economic developed countries since 1950s. So that has renewed Malthusian fears and to look at the impact around the world. And the main group that has taken this on and look at it closely is the Club of Rome in 1972, where they commissioned and published their report called Limits to Growth Model. So what is this Club of Rome? Yeah, so it's an NGO research organization. They highlight the limits to growth model that place the relationship between economic growth and the natural environment at the center of the debate. Yeah, so all this while it is mainly about economic growth. How do we feed the population? We can bring technology, we can introduce this, introduce that. The environment is not, the natural environment is not taken really into consideration. They look at the environment mainly as a resources to be subject to human device system. But here, the Club of Rome said, no, we need to look into the natural environment itself. So that is why it was brought into the debate. Now, Club of Rome, what is their basic conclusion? If present growth trends continue, and if associated industrialization, population, food production, and resource depletion continue unchanged, the limits to growth on this planet will be reached sometime in the next 100 years. So the most probable result being catastrophe. That is basically going back to Malthus' idea of population catastrophe, Malthusian catastrophe. But this one, he said, is a sudden and uncontrollable decline in population and industrial capacity. It's nothing to do, not that it's, the difference is Malthus talks about war, famine, and disease, but here it's about a sudden uncontrollable decline in population and industrial capacity. So Club of Rome, they have some basic conclusion. Basis of this doom led to prediction is based on 5 processes: population growth, non-renewable resource use, pollution, food supply, and industrialization. So they don't just look at food supply and population, but also look at energy, they look at pollution, they look at industrialization. So Club of Rome adopts the view of development which places economic growth at the heart of the process in terms of helping to improve poorer people's standards of living. So suddenly standard of living of the people become the main concern. Is not about wealth creation. Yeah, so quite different from earlier notion of growth means wealth creation. So however, the nature and rate of this growth must be controlled so as to ensure that future generations have access to non-renewable energy sources, minerals, and agricultural land, as well non-polluted environment. So is the Club of Rome right? So don't panic. Doesn't take into account of the ability of humans to respond to situations again and innovate. Human responses have changed. They now we produce alternative energy, high yield varieties of seeds and sent to Africa. So alternative energy has become, now we call it green energy, green economy, and so on and so forth. So humans still have a way to respond to these challenges that Club of Rome has highlighted. So this has led to, okay, if technology is bringing destruction, is there a way for us to make sure that technology can still serve us, that we're not going to go back to the primitive era, primitive years where we don't depend on technology. So Schumacher wrote a book called Small is Beautiful, a study of economics as if people mattered, right? So people again come back into the center, then into the center of the debate, and basically saying that rather than concentrating on maximizing flows of money and economic growth, he argued that economic policies everywhere in the world should be people-centered, right? So this is to allow individuals to be human rather than merely a cog in a large economic machine, and also in recognition of existing environmental destruction that was occurring through the use of existing economic approaches. So this has led to what he called the intermediate technology, not big, huge technology, But he said the answer is not to return to pre-industrial primitive age, rather it was to implement policies which were appropriate to the needs of particular groups of people. In countries where there were large number, so people without formal employment, Schumacher stated that it was a bad practice to implement policies using high-tech equipment which could do the work of hundreds of people. So he said, for us to employ technology, we must look at the demography of the people. If the technology that we're going to implement is going to take jobs away from people, create unemployment rate, increase unemployment rate, then that technology is not appropriate for the situation for that country. So we need to look at the needs of particular groups of people, right? So that is what he called intermediate technology. And then the other thing that emerged out of the Club of Rome is the notion of sustainable development. In 1993, the UN set up an independent organization called World Commission on Environment and Development. It was chaired by the then Prime Minister of Norway. And then they read to, I'm sure you have seen the Brundtland report. So the aim of the organization was to examine the problems of environment and development facing the world and to consider possible solutions. So this solution should be considered not just for current generations, but with an awareness of long-term issues. So sustainable development in 1987, the WCED published its findings in a report called Our Common Future, or also known as Brundtland Report. The report laid out the environmental challenges facing the world and examine how environmental destruction would limit forms of economic growth, and also how poverty and disadvantage contribute to environmental destruction. So basically it talks about, we need to look at the balance. We need to look at the future, the current situation. At the same time, we make sure that people are fed carefully, that we fight poverty, but we do not destroy the environment at the same time. So this is why we have to look at sustainable development. The report stressed on sustainable development as a goal towards which the international community should work. According to the organization, sustainable development is development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own. So as we develop today, we must think about your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren, making sure that they have the same access to the same forest that you have today, have the same access to the river that you are enjoying today. So basically that's what sustainable development is all about. So now there are debates in sustainable development. Yeah, so there are two debates, there are terms, especially that came out of the Rio de Janeiro big conference on sustainable development. There's debate over terms like light green technocratic approaches versus dark green ecocentric approaches. Light green focus on humankind and the improvements in human standards of living and quality of life. There's no radical changes in the current economic and political systems. Dark green starts with premise that is the earth, which is much more important than ideas about human progress and rapid economic growth. So basically those are the two differences. The light green still focus on human being, but still focus on the people, making sure that the standard of living and the quality of people are taken care of. There is no changes in the political and economic system. Whereas dark green, yeah, they put more focus on the environment. Yeah, so basically that is so this is light green. Yeah, so the sustainable is a process that empower people in poor communities to ultimately help themselves. It is powerful, long-lasting development. It empowers process that place people, those being affected, at the center of their own development. So people steal the focus, not necessarily the environment. Yes, we take the environment, but people are still the focus. People are equipped with the necessary knowledge, skills, and appropriate values and attitudes to act and manage their own environment. So it takes care of it takes into consideration human rights, gender equity, environment, effective communication. And it is non-discriminatory and protects the dignity of all people. It does not discriminate on the basis of race, color, gender, religion, political opinion, or social origin or birth status. Yeah, so all sustainable development must be planned, monitored, and evaluated. Yeah, so it consider human rights. Yeah, so it must take into consideration human rights framework. Yeah, so basically human rights, and it includes men and women of the community, long-term planning, infrastructure with local products and people power, water and food availability and security. So yeah, so all these things must be taken into consideration. It must meet the basic needs of the people, and teaching people how to get people to grow and rotate crops, growing different vegetables for variety, and make sure that it's income generating. Health education is very important. Yeah, and we can see that how health education is utterly important through the COVID-19 pandemic that is ongoing. Primary school education is basically it must be, everyone must be allowed, or must be some people say made compulsory to attend primary school education. Birth education is also important. So peace and reconciliation education, conservation of non-renewable resources and finding alternate resources. How about advocacy? Yeah, making sure during war the interests of children like this are taken care of. Yeah, so a knowledge of how to network with local government, with state and federal government, with other development organizations in the